Over the years, many of us have built up a collection of handy tools to help with system administration and troubleshooting. I thought some of you might find it helpful if I gave you a peek inside my toolkit, so I decided to write down a few. I wrote down close to 50. We don't have time for that, so here's what I'll do. I'm going to share a few of them in this video. You're going to watch this video, and then you're going to tell me if you want more. If you want more, I'll give you more. Welcome back to the Pro Tech Show. All of the tools in this video are free, so you can integrate them into your toolkit without having to worry about licensing. Depending on how you choose to count, I'll either be showing you 7 tools, 8 tools, or well over 100 tools. That's because the last tool is actually a helpful service that will itself give you access to loads of other tools. A tool gateway, so to speak. Make sure you stick around for that one. Let's ease into this gently. The first tool I think everyone should have in their bag is 7-zip. Now, I realise that basically any operating system these days can zip and unzip files, but IT pros tend to deal with more complicated archives than just your standard zip file. For one, the formats used in Linux and Windows tend to be different, so you'll often find yourself with, say, a gzip file that Windows can't extract natively. That's why back in the day, when most people had dodgy copies of WinZip, the techies had dodgy copies of WinRAR instead. I mean, seriously, has anyone ever actually seen a licensed copy of one of those? Comment if you bought it. Another reason is that as an IT pro, you'll often want to extract individual files from self-extracting archives like installers without actually installing the full program. 7-zip can help you do that, and it can help you do it legally. WinRAR and WinZip may have become internet memes and given us all a laugh due to their never-ending trials, but we all know that just because you can use an expired trial doesn't mean you should. If you install unlicensed software on a company's devices or servers, then you're putting them in a really dodgy position. There could be legal ramifications, or one day an auditor does a scan, finds it, and they fail to pass the certification. Suddenly the tool you thought was harmless could end up costing you your job. I find this all the time when working with new customers, and there is no need for it. 7-zip is free, it's fast, it does everything you need. Just use 7-zip and avoid any licensing problems. The next tool I want to mention is the Windows SSH command. Hear me out in this one. Haven't you heard of PuTTY or the Windows Terminal? Yes, and did a video on the latter. They're both better than the built-in SSH command. Assuming you're on Windows Server 2016, Windows 10 or later, the SSH command is built in. It is amazing how many people don't actually know this. I'll hear people grumbling about needing to access a switch or a Linux server from a Windows box, but they don't have internet access to download PuTTY. Guess what? You don't need it. The SSH command is built in and enabled by default. If you're working on your own admin workstation, use whatever SSH client you prefer. But if you're connecting to other people's servers as a consultant or an MSP, then I think it's good practice to leave as little trace as possible. By that I don't mean cleaning the logs behind you. Don't do that, that is dodgy AF. What I mean is, don't go installing your favourite tools on somebody else's system just because you like them. It's their system, not your virtual living room. Get your feet off the sofa. With servers, less is more. The more software you put on it, the bigger the attack surface. Anything you install, someone has to patch. Assuming they know about it, which they probably don't. The SSH command might not be the most fully featured SSH client, but it's always there for a quick connection and you don't need to download any extra files, so don't forget about it. While we're talking about remote terminals, let's talk about the Telnet Client. The Telnet protocol is old, outdated, hardly insecure, and you should basically never use it. The Telnet Client, on the other hand, is a troubleshooting Swiss Army knife. On most Windows and Linux systems, it isn't enabled or installed out of the box. But if this system has been around for more than, a week, there's a fair chance someone has already enabled it. The reason the Telnet protocol sucks is it's just sending characters back and forth, there's no encryption. Because it's so simple though, the client can basically talk to anything that uses plain text. And that is actually quite a few protocols, many of which has been with us for a very long time. If I'm having an email problem, I can point the Telnet client at the email server on port 25 and strike up a conversation. This is how email started out, and it hasn't really changed under the covers. So I can type my commands and see what the server says in return. Often the fastest way to see what is going wrong is just to ask the server directly. You can Google the syntax if you've never done this before. It's actually pretty simple, and will quickly teach you why you should never trust the sender address on an email just by itself. Can I send you an email, please? No, because I'm low on resources. Okay, cool. Somebody go check this space in the server and find out why we didn't get alerted to it. The same thing works for POP, IMAP, FTP, etc, etc. But probably the second most common use I have for it is HTTP. Yes, you can just point the thing at a website and talk to Google on port 80. Here's the HTML source for google.com. Admittedly, it's not the most useful way to browse a website, but you can quickly see if it's responding or not and if it's throwing an error. The one downside of using Telnet is that it's pretty useless if the other end relies on encryption. And if the data you're transmitting is sensitive, it really should do. Although you can use a Telnet client to log into an IMAP server, if you did that you'd be sending your password in plain text. And that's a really bad idea. That doesn't mean it's useless though. The Telnet client is great for basic connectivity tests to a TCP port. If you can telnet to the port and the console goes black, you know the port was open and listening. If the command hangs though and times out, then well, either the service isn't running or you couldn't reach it. This is a great way to check for network problems. If a local telnet test works, but a remote one doesn't, then you know the service was listening, but something's blocking you from getting to it at the network level. Probably a firewall or maybe a routing issue. But what if you've got connection and you want to have a conversation with the server for further troubleshooting, but the service requires encryption, as it probably should? At this point, unless you can type in encryption, you're pretty stuck with a Telnet client. Which brings me on to the next tool that you should learn to love. OpenSSL. The OpenSSL library is responsible for a fair chunk of the internet's communications, which is why the Heartbleed vulnerability was such a big deal. On Linux it's probably installed anyway, and for Windows it's just a free download. There are two things I find myself using OpenSSL for quite often. The first is related to the Telnet example. What if you need to send and receive commands with an encrypted service? Just use OpenSSL's S-client. Google the syntax to open the connection, and from there you can just type away as before in plain text. All of the encryption is just handled for you. You can let it figure out what encryption to use if you want an easy life, or you can specify exactly what encryption to use, which can be handy if you want to diagnose problems where two different sides are supporting mismatched standards. It's also a great way to diagnose certificate problems because you can view the encryption certificates being used. On a website this is no big deal because your browser will show it to you. But when you're having problems connecting to something less visible, like maybe a phone system or an email server, then there's often no way to simply see the certificate in the user interface. OpenSSL will show you. Speaking of certificates, that's the second reason I tend to find myself cracking OpenSSL open. It seems like everything uses certificates these days because encryption is a good thing. But what they can't agree on is which format to use. Windows likes PSExec files, Linux tends to like separate certs and keys, and applications installed on top, they can use any old mixture imaginable. With OpenSSL, you can type a command and convert between them, so whichever format you have your certificate in, you can always change it to whatever your application requires. I know there are websites that will let you point and click your way through this, but don't. Google the syntax and use OpenSSL. Certificates consist of public keys and private keys. The whole point of it, the entire method by which we can trust encryption, is that you never, ever let anyone else see your private key. Share the public key with anyone you want, that's fine. Never, ever give your private key to anyone. If you use a website to do the conversion, you have to give them your private key. That defeats the entire point of having a signed certificate in the first place. If someone running that website is malicious, or they've been breached by someone malicious, they can now impersonate you or decrypt your communications. The likelihood might not be very high, but there is no justification for taking that risk when a single command with a free tool will just do the job for you instead. We're leaving the command line behind now and going back to our Windows comfort zone. The next tool I'd like to share is WinMerge. WinMerge does a simple but powerful thing. It compares files and folders and shows you the differences. This is a great way to answer the perennial question of what's changed, or to reconcile differences if two things get out of sync with each other. Let's start with the what's changed scenario. If you have two different config files and want to quickly see how they differ, load them into WinMerge and it will highlight all of the differences for you. This is helpful in so many ways. Compare a live copy against a backup copy, or a working system against a broken system. If I'm making a change, say I'm scripting something across a large estate, I will dump the current state into a text file, make my change, and dump the new state into a new text file. Then I'll take those two text files and compare them using WinMerge to verify that the change I expected is the change that happened, or that there were no operational changes if that was a particular worry. Consider the power of this. In Linux, most of your configuration is done in text files, and you tend to work in Bash, which outputs text. In Windows, most things have gone PowerShell, which is also outputting text, and everything in PowerShell can be exported to XML, which is a text file. The results of virtually anything you might need to do or check in a server can be compared using WinMerge. The other way I'll tend to use it is to compare two sets of folders that are supposed to be in sync but aren't. The classic example here is Active Directory. If people start reporting weird and unpredictable group policy effects, then it's usually a sign that DFS is broken and your sysvols have gotten out of sync. Simply point WinMerge at your domain controllers, let it compare them, and you can see which are in sync, which aren't, and where the latest versions of each policy are. Staying within the Windows world, let's talk Sysinternals. If you've never used one of the Sysinternal tools, do you really work in IT? Sysinternals is a collection of tools and utilities for managing and troubleshooting Windows. Originally they were produced by a company called Winternals, but in 2006 Microsoft decided, hey, those tools are pretty good and everyone seems to use them, we should probably just buy the company. There are loads of tools in this collection and you've probably seen or used some of them without even realising it. Ever worked somewhere and noticed the desktop had a readout of some useful information about the computer, like its name and its IP address? That's BGInfo, and it's a Sysinternals tool. Seen an admin with remote desktop connections all organised into hierarchical dashboard type of thing? That's probably RDC Man, another Sysinternals tool. As I said, there are lots of tools here, but the two I wanted to bring to your attention in particular are PSExec and Process Explorer. Process Explorer is like Task Manager meets Chuck Norris. It lets you dig much deeper into the processes running on your system, and if you ever find yourself struggling with a locked file but no idea which process is actually using it, Process Explorer can help you find the answer. I don't find myself reaching for this much these days, but back when I worked in a service desk I'd use it a lot. Sometimes turning it off and on again isn't the best answer, especially for a production system. If you can track down that pesky file lock without resorting to a reboot, you can get that ticket closed pronto without the need to wait for a maintenance window. The other tool I've used quite a bit is PSExec. This lets you run commands on another system, which has all sorts of really useful applications. You can make changes remotely without bothering users. You can apply them at scale by scripting them, even if there is no native remote management for whatever system you're trying to access, because PSExec takes the commands and runs them locally on the target system for you. These days you can achieve a lot of the same thing using PowerShell's invoke command or its PS sessions. PSExec predates that, but it hasn't quite been replaced by it yet. There are two scenarios where PSExec is still really useful. The first is to avoid Kerberos double hop problems. When you connect to another system using PowerShell, you authenticate to it and you send your command. What if that command needs to run an authenticated execution against something else? That is a double hop, where you authenticate to one thing which then authenticates to another. The problem with that is Kerberos will not allow you to do it without some very specific configuration. This can cause PowerShell scripts that ran perfectly well locally to fail if you try and run them remotely because you've added a second authentication hop. PSExec sidesteps this problem by launching your command locally on the target system. So when the command authenticates to something else, that's only its first hop, not the second. The second thing about PSExec that is really useful is its ability to run as a local system account. Forget your administrator account, the system account is the one with the real power. This is helpful to fix unfixable permissions problems, or to get into that part of the registry that Windows didn't really want you to get into. Or if you need to authenticate on the network as the computer account itself, that last part can be really handy to troubleshoot permissions problems, or to test things like group policies or startup and shutdown scripts that ordinarily run in the context of the computer system account before any user actually logs in. Those are the two Sysinternal tools that I've used more than any others. But before I go, I want to show you something else. It's called Sysinternals Live, and it's less of a tool and more of a service, but still free. If you type live.sysinternals.com into a web browser, you get this rather basic directory listing of all the tools. It's a handy no-frills way to access them. You can pull any of them down quite easily from a script, as the latest version is always available at live.sysinternals.com/the name of the tool. But it's more than just a website. It's also available over the internet as a plain old SMB file share. You can enter /live.sysinternals.com/tools and they're all right there. You can copy paste them. You can even run them directly from that file share. That works from the command prompt too. Look how easily I can get my command prompt to run as a Windows system account. Not only is this a handy way to get hold of the latest version, but you can incorporate it directly into your scripts. As long as you've got internet access, you don't need to distribute copies of the tools along with your script. Your script could simply pull them down or even run them straight from the file share. Of course, you might not want to do that. In the wake of ever-increasing supply chain attacks, maybe pulling down and running code from a file share on the internet isn't the ideal way to run privileged scripts, especially ones that you're going to leave running unattended for the long term. But there's no denying that it's pretty handy. Now it's your turn to give me some feedback. I've mentioned a few tools here, but as I said at the start, I have quite a list of them. Let me know if you found this video useful, and if it does well, I'll post more. You can of course improve those chances by liking, sharing and subscribing. And why don't you use the comments section to share your own favourite tools as well. I'm quite interested to see how many of the ones you suggest are already on my list. Maybe you'll suggest enough new ones that I've never used that I'll end up doing a viewer suggestions episode as well. That could be quite fun, I think. Anyway, that's the end of this for today. Thanks for stopping by and thanks for watching to the end. See you next time.